All right, I want to welcome everybody to the February 15th, 2024 meeting of the Seattle Design Commission. Our meetings are being recorded on WebEx to be posted later on our website and made available to the public. From 10 until noon today, we have one project that we'll be looking at. It's the public benefit review for the 200 Taylor Avenue North Allocation Project. We'll have a number of panelists here today. And we'll have them introduce themselves along with commissioners and people who are attending. With all of our meetings, we have an opportunity for public comment, and we ask people to limit their comments to no more than 2 minutes. There are a variety of people in the room today. I'm assuming that most of them are associated with either the developer or that team, and so we also look online to see who might be attending to make sure that people who are attending online want to make public comment, that we have an opportunity for that as well. I think what we'll go ahead and do is start with introductions with commissioners and then the development team. And we'll start with commissioners and staff in the room. And then we have three commissioners who are attending today as well, and then we'll, after the people in the room introduce themselves, we'll have commissioners, and then we'll have the presenters. Why don't we start with that?
Hi, good morning. Adam Amrine, Urban Planning Commissioner.
Morning, Jay Backman. I usually them their pronouns, and I'm going to get engaged commissioner.
Good morning. I'm Molly Stefanik, she, they, and I'm the Urban Development Commissioner.
Valerie Kimas, staff to the commission.
Michael Jenkins.
Wendy Banneker, staff.
Good morning, I'm Kevin O'Neill, I'm the Transportation Planning Commissioner.
Ben Gist, Architect Commissioner.
Jack McCullough, I'm here for the applicant.
Why don't we have commissioners introduce themselves, starting with Elizabeth, then Jill, then Matt.
Elizabeth Connor, Artist Commissioner. Good morning.
Jill Crary, at-large Commissioner and Chair.
Alf's Architect Commissioner.
And we have a number of people at the table as well.
Yeah, so I'm Brad Rock with Biomed, developer leader.
I'm Jason Henry, the landscape architect of the Burger Partnership.
Ryan Broussard, Architect with Perkins & Will.
Why don't we do a quick introduction to the room? Why don't we start with staff?
Beverly Barnett, Seattle Department of Transportation. Amy Gray, Seattle Department of Transportation.
Elise
Meredith, Seattle Department of Transportation. And then I'm Kelsey Blomer, I'm with OAZ, not Seattle Department of Transportation. Associated with the project.
Chris Park, as civil engineer, KBFF.
Kelly Schnell, Perkins & Will.
I think that covers everything. One last thing, when you're speaking and you're logged into the WebEx meeting, could you please turn your camera, we have to make sure that we're muted in the room, but please turn your camera on because it helps for more robust. Okay. So double meeting. Double super secret meeting. Who's Brian kicking us off? Or Jack?
I am.
Jack.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to start by apologizing. I obviously in the introductions, Michael, Madam Chair, I jumped the gun. I'm not a member of the commission.
Again.
There may be a day, you're right. So we're just here on the T6 project with the Biomed team to try, hopefully to conclude our public benefit. As it's been a long process here, and I just wanted to, and it's taken some twists and turns that really, frankly, were quite unexpected, but fortuitous, and I think at the end, really great. So I just want to take 2 minutes to recap that a little bit for you. When we started out, if you remember, we're vacating the alley, but actually leaving the alley prism there and turning it into more of a pedestrian space in order to protect the green street to the north. And we had started with a concept that focused our public benefit around that internal space in our first meeting. And the guidance we got from the commission was, probably not the best idea. We should be kind of looking outward to the perimeter of the site, to the neighborhood, look for other opportunities for public benefit. So we pivoted, took a different approach. The last time we saw you, we tried to do that, and then we thought we've got a green street in front of us, right? So let's see what we can do there. And we looked, obviously, logically, immediately across the street to the north, the City Light property, and thought that would be just perfect, right? We could kind of double load that improvement on our side and theirs. City Light beat us to the punch, right? And they had budget money that's already been allocated to do that, so that didn't work. So we're scratching our head, what do we do now? Well, at the same time, this commission had been reviewing the Thomas Street plan and approving it. It's all approved, ready to go. But you also gave guidance to SDOT, which we were unaware at the time. And the guidance to SDOT is, why is this just a publicly funded project, right? You should go out and try to find some private partners. Well, SDOT took that to heart. And they looked around and they said, who's a logical private partner? And there we were. So they came and said, we've got this unfinished piece, both your frontage for this project, right? And then also the western piece of Thomas that's not being completed by the 223 Taylor project, but that's just immediately south of the skate park. And they said, we've got a gap here. Would you like to fund the gap? And so, no, that's interesting. So we ensued several months of conversations about that. The challenge to that is that the way this process usually works is when you get a vacation approval, you don't provide the public benefits until you develop the project, right? And so that's like years from now. So, I mean, we were a willing private partner, but the timing, just wasn't ideal because this work is ready to start and that's how it's going to get moving. So we took a pretty radical step, and I have hats off to the biomed team. We talked about what if we provided the money up front before the project started, with the full recognition that the project might never happen, right? And there's not like a string you can tie to the funds and say, oh, can we get those back if we decide later on that we're not doing this? So completely at-risk money. So we spent some time working with SDOT, the biomed team, taking it up through your investment committees, and the answer came back, yeah, that's something we can do. So it's never been done before, to my knowledge, here in the city in this process. So the proposal you're going to see has some perimeter public benefit improvements on the site that are similar to what you've seen before, but includes an agreement to fund $2.4 million in cash to SDOT for the completion of the Thomas Street, Green Street improvements that you have approved. And that payment would occur within 90 days of completion of the master use permit process. So sometime later this year. So you asked the question, why on earth would the applicant do this, right? It's a little counterintuitive. Well, obviously we're in challenging market conditions. And what we're presenting to you and what we've talked to Michael and the city about is using this as an opportunity to get a little more runway, a little more flexibility on the entitlement approval. So pushing out the vacation approval a little bit beyond what would ordinarily be the timetable, given these uncertain times. Allowing us to phase the project so we could complete phase one and complete the vacation to an ordinance, right, without having completed phase two. As you'll see, the phase two public benefits are really, it's not a big package. It's a very small package. And so we would have a PUDA, obviously, on phase two. The PUDA would say that when phase two gets done, those public benefits will be done. But the other thing that's different about this is that the complete public benefit package would not be complete when the ordinance is approved by City Council. 90% of it will be complete, and there will be a covenant to ensure the rest of it, right? And then the final thing was to try to build a little more flexibility and understanding the project might not start for a while to allow, some design modifications, whatever they might be, that are consistent with the spirit of the project, without having to go back to City Council. Working with staff, working with the MUD process, working with Michael and maybe a subcommittee here of the commission. So that's what's going to be in front of you tonight. They say the market conditions right now they're unpredictable, month to month, they sort of go up and down. We've got the stars aligned on this thing. And so we would love to leave today with your blessing. We can figure out if there are any loose ends, how to tie those up afterward. But having gotten this commitment from the VMR investment group, we'd like to put it to bed, and we've got a chance to do that today. So whatever we can do to get there, we're here to try to get it done with you. So that's all I have to say. Brad, did I miss anything?
No, I think that's well said. And, again, we appreciate the opportunity to continue to work with us along the way, right? I mean, that's been a great effort and a great partnership along every meeting and every avenue that we've stepped. So I just appreciate your guys' willingness to take the time and work with us as we kind of navigate this and get to the solution that I think we're presenting today that I think is a great solution for all. So.
And with that, you can enjoy what you actually came here to listen to, which is not me. But our design.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Jack.
Yeah.
So to remind everyone about the site, we're located in the Uptown neighborhood. Here you can see the site. You can actually see the Gates Foundation directly to the north, Seattle Center to the west. We're in a really interesting kind of 9-square kind of grid pattern, bound on the east side by 6th Avenue, to the west by Taylor, to the north Thomas Street, which is our Green Street, and to the south John Street. As we talked about, Jack's alluded a little bit to the potential phasing. So the site plan's to the left, north is to the left with Thomas Street, anticipating that if we do proceed with phasing, we would phase the westerly building first and then the easterly building. So we are proposing within that as a total build out 2 high-rise buildings, looking for life science tenants, both 8 and 9 stories. As part of this, we're, as you can see, and we'll talk a little bit more, a comprehensive total site design, really dedicated more towards the public realm, pedestrians. So by that, we are actually seeking the alleyfication. And as part of that, we're also going to be enhancing open space both at the corners of the site, the southeast, which is the upper right, and the lower left, which is the northwest corner, and having that dedicated pedestrian connection, which we reviewed with you all as well as through our recommendation meetings with the design review board. This is kind of the outline of the project in terms of the timeline and where we are today. We've been meeting with you and other people for several years now on the project. It's a couple things to highlight that happened last year. In particular, we had our meeting number 2 with you back in last March of last year, then followed that up with actually our design review board meeting, the recommendation meeting, which we did pass, taking into account your comments as well as theirs to the package. And we are here today. The other thing to point out is, and you had encouraged us, is throughout this process, after we met with you, is to continue the public outreach, which we continue to do and incorporate that into the project. Some of the key comments that the DRB made in support of the project were to continue to work with our planners. As you may recall, these have kind of very kind of sculptural base and arches that kind of frame the pedestrian connections and frame the connection to our open space, kind of parklets on the corners of the site. So they want to make sure that we continue to work with our planner to refine and make sure we don't have any accessibility issues in terms of head clearance and height, which we've been able to achieve on the project. And then also make sure they saw the canopies as an integral part of the design and maintaining those, which we have. And we'll show those in more detail in the project. And that's also tied, obviously, all those attributes to really the open space we have framed on the site, both in the more generous right-of-ways on the eastern and western portions of the site, and then on the kind of parklets we've designed in the southeast here, shown on John Street, and the northwest edge here, looking at the northwest side. One of the key aspects that we had also done was for the recommendation meeting, but also for yourselves, is kind of walking around the site. It's a really interesting site in terms of exposure, kind of the urban condition, as well as what we're trying to do with the design. So these were images where we tried to walk around the site to kind of frame the variety of experiences, the public program we're placing within the building, as well as the open space, and really knitting those together. So on the upper left is a view kind of on the northwest corner of the site, thinking about kind of right here along the Green Street, along Thomas Street, having cafe, public lobby, functions on that edge that spill out to, as you can see here, the setbacks and the arches with frame open space. On the lower left, as you would kind of circumnavigate around the site, the pedestrian connector replaces the alley because we're putting all our service, loading, parking in through one entry that goes below grade. So that really allows us to open up the site. And those frame those kind of corner kind of edges that we've talked about here. One, which is in the middle, I guess I can use my cursor here. Oh, you can't see it. Is kind of the idea of open space that is directly adjacent either to kind of more community functions or actually to the Green Street here on Thomas Street. And then the upper right is showing the actual canopies and having those as devices to frame public program or building entries. And then also that the buildings have a variety of scale and textures that break down the scale and size of the building. Different reveals aspects have a podium level, which is separated from the upper volume and the massing. And also that the variety of experiences within the building also flow out into the exterior and the public realm. Your guidance for us when we had met last were a bit varied because we were talking fairly early on the project. On the left, there were some different ideas about if the public benefit was sought on site, how to talk about that and how that may be looked at. You also had offered ideas about offsite. If we actually look at the stormwater system, having that kind of addressed, we found out that wasn't feasible as we started to look at that. So that's why, as Jack kind of hinted, we pivoted towards looking to other offsite improvements, which include the completion of the Green Street to the northwest of our block. And obviously, we've incorporated your other comments, which were also resonating with the design review board in terms of connections, the space, the types of public amenities offered around the perimeter of the site. So this is kind of the collection of the public benefits, the overview. The first being, as Jack alluded to, and we just talked about, is the Thomas Street, the Green Street funding. I'll show that in plan and location of how that works, which will be our kind of contribution of 2.4 million. And then on site, we have a variety of other improvements we're making. So the sidewalk improvements, which we'll talk about. We have the oversized right of way, so really enhancing that, creating the kind of respites and moments of interaction along those edges, the canopies and weather protection, tree canopy cover, enhancing those, as well as pedestrian amenities with the parklets and enhanced landscaping and pedestrian amenities on those edges. So all of those have been maintained on-site as well as the off-site contribution. And then this is kind of a graphic showing that so that we are creating on all edges of the site, which was one of your comments, as well as echoed by the review board, that we have active edges that embrace the public. You can also see the amount of open space shown in this kind of figure ground plan that's really kind of dedicated open space that we would have both for the program to spill out, but also for pedestrians to flow through the site. As we looked at this also, as we talked about, the phasing would be kind of west to east. And as we had just talked about, that those elements would be commensurate with the development in terms of how they would be phased in terms of the public benefit on site. In a little bit more detail, what we've looked at is for a phase 1 plan, you can see that we've actually maintained the pedestrian connector through the site. So being able to allow that to be porous and allow people to move through it. It will require some overhead temporary protection for the construction that's happening next door. The other element that I want to point out is that we're also looking at, because we know how important Thomas Street is, an improvement on the north side of the phased area. That may need to be removed when the construction happens, but at least in the temporal condition, we're completing the Thomas Street, that street edge.
I think, Ryan, just to point out, if you add it all up, we're going to be responsible for completing like a third of the entire
yes, extent,
both sides of Thomas, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, you'll see a graphic in a few minutes where we show that and have that amount. We've continued to engage, as you've asked us to, with an outreach plan to meet with different groups within the community, gather their feedback, and incorporate that into design. In general, we've had a lot of great supportive comments and support for the project through that. And you can see here a collection of the organizations we've met with and continue to meet with on the project. We've also continued that outreach to the neighbors and continue to incorporate the feedback, as you can see here, the kind of radius of the door-to-door neighbors that we've contacted. The neighborhood is fairly mixed in terms of the use of the businesses, the adjacency Seattle Center, and residential, which is on this edge of the site. So the door-to-door connection was important for the project. And we've continued to, once again, take the comments and actually incorporate them into the project. On the blue are actually ways we've incorporated it from, when we've talked to, surprisingly, the Cascade Bicycle Club, they were really interested in exterior bike racks and accessibility for the bicyclists and how we're promoting that. So we worked with them to explain that and also have that enhanced on the project. And then also support, as you can see for some of the others, support the design, support of the arch forms, the recollection of that from the history of Seattle Center into the project from the Uptown Alliance. So in looking at this, as we kind of alluded to, you can see here on this diagram our site here, and then the areas in green are areas that are already currently in the process of being improved by SDOT on the Tom Street and on the Green Street. The area in blue or cyan just directly north of our site would be constructed as part of the project. And the area in this kind of fuchsia color is actually the piece that we would be financing as part of the project. So completing, as Jack had mentioned, almost a third of the entire Green Street segment in this area. In more detail, this is showing the area that we would be contributing the funds to. The other portions that are excluded from this are being constructed as part of other projects right now. So this does complete the western terminus of the Green Street. And some of the advantages is obviously think about the larger public realm and circulation. It connects back to our project site, which is just a block away. So it benefits the community as well as the project for them.
So, as Ryan and Jack mentioned, as part of the package, we are looking at sidewalk improvements around the perimeter. So we do have expanded sidewalk on 6th Avenue, actually creating opportunities and spaces for those. The frontage improvements, I think, again, are an important piece of the overall design decision. But here we are allowed to basically remove the angled parking. We still have parallel parking and expand the right-of-way widths both for planting and sidewalk. A little more detailed view of that look. You can see that additional sidewalk width allows us to provide for seating opportunities, additional planting area, and really expand the pedestrian amenities, particularly along 6th. And just looking at that in section, you can see with the Nova Alley Vacation option on the left and the Alley Vacation option on the right, really does provide for greater experience both for the community and just passersby, as well as creating those little parklet spaces that Ryan mentioned. Just a view looking at that in terms of the additional planting and the additional sidewalk width. I think it's an important piece, particularly in the north-south direction. Again, another overall view looking at that amenity. And again, that width, we hope to disperse that throughout the project, and we have those improvements both on 6th Avenue as well as Taylor.
And then, as I mentioned, during our recommendation meeting, there was a lot of support for the approach to the exterior of the building, which included the overhead weather protection, the canopies. They're indicated here in yellow on the two buildings, and they've been used to highlight a variety of the public functions, the building entries, as well as areas for potential tenant space or future retail on the project. Once again, providing in conjunction with the parklets really enhanced public realm for people moving on the edges of the site. As you can see, part of the way we're able to take advantage of this is because of the ability to take advantage of the right-of-ways, the enhanced right-of-ways in those areas to create the parklets and have the increased setback, and the difference between the no alley vacation option and our proposal. And that these are accounting for almost on some edges of the site, almost 280 feet, almost the full length of the block with the exception of the open space in the direct corners of the site. So really providing continuous weather protection on the westerly edge of the site. And then you can see here some of the dimensions and the associated areas of that. So it's, once again, having these be sizable canopies, they project almost 9 feet beyond the face of the building. So really work well in creating a substantial overhead clearance and coverage for people who are moving along the edge of the site. And then a view of that continuous canopy along the edge. And then where we've broken it here on the east side, which highlights the two major building entries, the public lobby and public access to the cafe, and then the access to tenant space or future retail, and the arcade space, which is this really interesting kind of cafe kind of function we're looking at that operates opposite the parklet on the southeast corner.
Tree canopy cover is something that we heard really is a good goal, so we're including that. With that expanded right away, we actually have opportunities for additional planting, so wanting to meet or exceed Seattle's urban forest plan for canopy coverage. That allowed us to add 7 to 10 additional trees on Taylor, and actually mixed species planting. So we have both conifers and deciduous species. Next slide. You can see in the section just that diversity in plant and tree type feels really important, as well as to be a good model for this community and the city as far as what we're doing for canopy coverage. This is a view kind of looking at that corner in North Plaza, just being able to see a little bit down that streetscape. Again, these are very generous planting areas, so we have a lot of root volume. We expect that these trees will actually develop very well. The pedestrian amenities on Taylor and 6th, again, with that expanded right away, we have an opportunity to increase both benches and tables and the amount of furniture that we're providing, as well as that amount of space. This is in the phase 1 improvements. And then on 6th Avenue, phase 2 improvements, you can see again, we've got an opportunity to expand the amount of paving as well as the amount of seating. And that would be a diversity in seating types too, as we work our way around the entire city.
And then this is our very exciting matrix that we've developed for this. We should use some fuchsia or yellow on it next time to make it more exciting. But this is a kind of general accounting of the things we just covered that go from the offsite improvements, you can see the categories, to the onsite improvements, which are 2 to 6. The areas that we've described within this presentation design, more specifics on that. Obviously, the design benefits, whether it's contributing to offsite the completion of the Green Street to enhancing the kind of public benefit on site. And then we've tracked it, obviously, the estimated quantities and then the values to that, which is almost 4.8 million. I can leave that up if anyone wants to read it more in length, but the general overview. And then this is just kind of highlighting kind of what Jack had talked about at the beginning of the.
This page is my fault.
Yes.
Right? But,
This is the rolling end of the auto commercial.
yeah,
So,
yeah. Written by a lawyer, but you might conclude, but I did want these terms to exist and live somewhere in the record, and look for your reaction to be able to carry forward.
I think Beverly may have a reaction that she'll be willing to provide into the presentations.
I believe that was our last slide. So we try to go through that expeditiously, knowing that you have an agenda.
I appreciate that. We have you until noon. I think we have plenty of time to have the review that we're going. Commissioners, what slide, what slide should we have them put up that would help? Maybe this overall site plan.
Site plan.
Start there and
Yeah.
see if anyone wants any changes.
This one help.
Yeah, we'll start there and see where we go. This is typically when we offer an opportunity for public comment. Again, I'm assuming that there aren't anyone within the room that wants to make independent comments, and I'm not actually seeing anyone that's attending online, but we'll make sure that we have an opportunity to, check back if someone does join us. Jill, this is normally when we would ask for commissioner questions. I think probably though, before that, maybe we can have Beverly provide a quick overview of her perspectives about the project and where they are.
Okay, so I guess I need to stand up so that this is the hybrid. There's a space where I'm supposed to stand. Need an X here, Michael. Okay, I made it. So thank you. Great to be back here in person. I had to figure out which button to push on the elevator. So it is really good to be back. I do find it's so much more helpful to be here in person and to be able to gauge responses and what people are doing. So I'm just glad we're back. I think on this project, it's really evolved a lot from when we first started on it. And I think they've been really, really flexible in trying to respond to SDOT and the public, and specifically the Design Commission. So we see an evolution that's really based on kind of all the input that we've all given. So I think that's great. I would say today that I'm hoping that the commission will look at the totality of the public benefit proposal. It's kind of easy to be distracted by the offsite payment, and I think we want to look at everything. And because the offsite amenities came to be because the commission had flagged some questions about, can everything really fit on site that provides the scale of public benefit that we want with these two office lab buildings? So that's part of the evolution, and I think we do want today to bring it all back together. I think the phasing is newer for all of us, and I think assuming that the Design Commission is supportive of that, we'll continue to look at council expectations and the timing of everything as Jack has laid out. And I don't think we have any disagreements on that. It's just when exactly what triggers what. I think some of the on-site work is almost more difficult to imagine, particularly like the alley, what happens in the alley to keep it passable when the adjacent building isn't coming online yet. And I know that commission has had some questions about interim conditions on the streetscape with a phasing plan. So I think we do want to refine the details of that, especially over time. Implementation on these complicated arrangements is difficult, and we've been dealing with that with some big projects where we're looking at implementation and we thought we were clear, and then a few years down the road with changed conditions, it's maybe not as clear as we anticipated. So I think the totality of the package is important. The phasing, we've seen the council accommodate how far we go in the phasing. We'll have to talk with Patrick and Lish about and kind of what happens when, being as clear as we can. I think if there are questions about the offsite money, I think the group has articulated it. The street concept plan has had a lot of public process and has been viewed by the Design Commission and the City Council. It was just the funding question. And so with the resolution of the funding question, I think SDOT is ready to proceed. And I think they didn't really express it as strongly today, but the team is proposing to close the funding gap, which is what we all had questions about earlier. How much would we get if they pay X amount of dollars? And now we're anticipating we can do everything. And with the payment of the money earlier than the end of the project, I think SDOT can get out there and do the work. So I think overall it looks really good. I think they've been really responsive. I think the only questions I have are just the details of the conditioning and the timing, and very interested in what the commission has to say about the total package and the phasing and the offsite improvements. So I think that's it, unless there's questions. If I can go back.
To the augmentation. And commissioners, maybe what we'll do is we'll start with commissioners in the room and then our colleagues online. One other thing before we start commissioner questions, and maybe we can start with Adam and work our way around the room. Aditi Kamboj is from ESTA, who heads up the Urban Design Group, is online as well. If you have any specific questions about the build out of Thomas Street, she's available. She's available online if you have any questions. So with that, I'll start with Adam.
Yeah, thank you. I was curious if you could, thank you for the presentation, and thank you for responding to our comments and very clearly showing how they play out. I was wondering if you could show a little bit more about, or just talk a little bit more about the phasing and the conditions of the site in the interim period, maybe some of your strategies for fencing and kind of what that area will look like in the interim, and then also maybe touching on the timing of the phasing and how long you expect kind of phase 1 and phase 2 and what's the gap between them.
Great. We got that plan.
We talked about, while Ryan's looking at fencing, we agree is important, and we've struggled with that a little bit. We think it's important to have a fence that has some degree of transparency, so that it doesn't become an opportunity to hide bad behaviors on that portion of the site. But as Ryan will discuss, I'll also find a way to do something more sort of decorative or whimsical with it, that can add to the urban environment. So Ryan, sorry.
Yeah, and I should have mentioned that the phase approach we did present at our recommendation meeting so that they could understand that there would be a condition potentially where some facades like the alley facade would be exposed. So we got approval of that facade and that approach as well. Since then, it's evolved a little bit since at that point. So this site plan is showing the kind of extent of the temporary fencing at the perimeter of the site, where we have a temporary surface. As Jack has mentioned, I think the preference is to have the fencing be open so you can see through it, not just from the exterior, but also thinking about people moving through the mid-block connector where the former alley is and feeling safe and having eyes on that space, both proceeding into it, but also people seeing it from the outside. So the idea is that we would construct the kind of temporary fencing in that phased area to essentially the building pad on those locations. And then have as much as we can, the kind of mid-block connector, that pedestrian connection open. That allows us to have, activate the programs, those other pieces, allow people to move through the site. As I mentioned, the overhead protection will probably go in place as we start the construction of phase 2. That's just for overhead clearances for any rain overhead work, so people are protected. And then on the northern half of the site of phase 2, which is, if the cursor shows up for a second, there. Previously, we had talked about not doing anything there because we know that when the construction happens, the fencing may change, shoring is going to impact that. We probably would have to take out the current condition. And I think in more discussions, depending on the length and timing of the phasing, it would be, we were encouraged and we think it'd be a benefit to actually continue the approach across that. So have a finished condition in front of the phase in its temporary condition. So meaning fence would be there, the sidewalk would be completed, the kind of plantings would be completed, the curb would be completed. So that edge of the green street looks done. We're probably going to find out that when we phase the second portion of construction, we may need to capture that. We'd actually sacrifice it, demolish it, and then reconstruct it later on. So that's something the team wants to take on. So urbanistically, it completes that edge of the project.
One of the things that's different about this fencing is usually when you put up fencing around a site where a structure has been demolished, you're doing it as an owner because you're walking away.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're look across the street. So this is different because we're going to have a very high performance building sitting there that BMR is going to be intent upon leasing at substantial rates. And so the look and feel of this space, obviously, Brad, will be critical to it.
Yeah, no, and how that feels is very important to us because it does impact our leasing ability, but that also then impacts our ability to get the next space going too. So that, we're very keen on how that space feels because, the pedestrians around there are also tenants in the building, right? So we need them all to live together at home. So,
Brad, do you have anything to say about timing?
So from a timing perspective, it is market driven. And so we do recognize that. The reality is that we look to build them as a single phase. If we have a leasing success, that would be our preferred approach. But we understand that the market may not support that in terms of a lease up requirements. So we would look to phase it. And I would anticipate that probably within a year or two of completing the first phase, we'd roll to the second phase. But again, it's still market driven to a large extent. We can't predict where the market's going on every front, but that's kind of what our vision looks like today.
You completed Dexter Yards not long ago.
Correct.
Just a stone's throw away and did 2 large towers simultaneously, right? Because the market did support it.
Yep. Yeah. And then when we've done past projects like this, it's been about a 2-year gap just in terms of fully leasing it up and then next round of construction. So.
Great. And this slide very clearly covers the Thomas Street, are you considering any kind of interim uses or improvements for the Sixth Avenue or I don't remember the name of the South Street that,
John Street.
John?
Not improvements, but we are constructing the fencing back, so the sidewalk and the curbs and the parking's all free and open, so people can move around the edges of the site.
We'd make sure that the parking on Sixth is, continues to be striped. So that that's a resource for the community.
And there is existing trees already along that street as well, that would be still in place, so you wouldn't be a bearscape on that frontage as well.
I don't think you can do more than 6 feet anyway. Anything above that requires a building permit for, so it has to be 6 feet or less.
Okay, I think that was it for me. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. One question I had for the alley vacation is, so as I understand correctly, we'll have the one driveway access for parking. Where is kind of other services going to take place? Trash pickup, drop off, delivery services? Is that also within the parking realm, or is that, I'm imagining where a UPS truck is going to go.
Sure.
Ryan, this reminds me, I forgot to give my speech about how we're putting all this underground.
Yeah,
Yes,
Jack,
yeah.
yes. Jack laid out our loading dock. So all services, all support, including the parking and loading, is all below grade. And we're using the single aperture here to bring, which is two-way, to bring in all service and all parking into the project. That would include UPS, loading for the building, servicing, trash, recycling. We also spent time, we didn't talk about this time, but we've spent time with the city to make sure that they were comfortable with our loading dock and the trash and recycling areas so that the clearances worked.
We did this with the tower at 1200 Stewart, Stewart and Denny alley vacation there, and pushed it all on the ground. And so remarkably, what you end up with a building that has no working side.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Which is phenomenal.
Yeah.
Great. I had one other question for kind of the canopy area, both the built canopy and the tree canopy. Well, I guess there's two questions I have for that. So it looked like there was kind of a second level here. Is that going to be also open to the public, or is that a private realm? Because it looked like there was the main floor, which would have kind of some of these cafe style, but then there was the setback.
Oh, the reveal zone?
Yes.
Yeah,
Is that also public access or not?
No, that's part of the tenant
Yes,
space.
okay,
moving.
understood.
Yeah.
And then my other question about the canopy itself is lighting of the sidewalk. And, it's great to see that kind of tree canopy. It's great to see that kind of pedestrian protection. But I know Seattle has quite strict rules around spacing between trees and lights. And has there been some discussion on pedestrian scale lighting and kind of if that's by the developer, if that's being owned and maintained by SDOT, kind of some discussion around that lighting?
Yeah, there has been discussion, and particularly there's a lot of utilities on this site, so there's a lot of coordination where those trees go. So it's no small feat to add 7 to 10 trees, particularly on Taylor. All that spacing has been considered, all the root volume has been considered. So that was one of the reasons we thought that was really just to demonstrate that could be done.
Okay.
So yeah, but yes, there is lighting, there are utilities, there are other things that we're considering with all the tree placement.
Okay, great, thank you.
And then I think once you get into the interior site and within these kind of park-like spaces and the pedestrian connectors, we have a second scale that's a little bit easier because it's on site at that point. Some were shown in the renderings, scale of bollards and kind of 12 to 14 foot high poles, which are quite elegant, made of kind of core 10 so that they can become a marker through the site.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Great, thank you. Greatly appreciate hearing some of the offsite developments and hearing the tighter working relationship with the city, with the commission and Beverly. Just a couple of questions. So this is just a little greater detail just on one of Adam's questions about that phase 2,
Sure.
phase 1, phase 2 line between the two buildings. So you've mentioned that I think one of the diagrams had shown the kind of blue dash line between the two phases, and it seems to be, so you had mentioned that it's really just at the building pad And so I was trying to understand. I was trying to understand if it really is split between the two building phases, where that phase line is, or if it is pulled back to the building face on phase two.
No, it's kind of split between the middle of the two. So it's split between the open space.
Mhm.
So, so the garage or below grade extend beyond the face of buildings in either phase. So we're able to preserve, as you can see here, kind of a zone on both this phase as the future phase. That makes sense.
Yeah, and what's the dimension of that? From the fencing to the face of phase one?
Sure, for this piece.
It's
Yes.
10 feet. So we split the 20 feet and there's enough, the whole idea was with the ground plane, there's a complete bit of paving there because again, as Brad said, we want it to be a good experience, not only for the tenants, for the lease up, for people passing through the space. So there's enough to complete that.
And then the 10 feet on the other side gives that construction clearance that allows people to move safely along the site edge and do the construction work on the other side and not also have to be into that other space. So it really allowed two separate work zone, pedestrian zones on phase two.
Okay, great, thank you. My next question was, I saw the kind of in the outreach component talking with Board Culture about some of those interior spaces that are more open to the public. Are those in phase one or phase two?
They're both. So some of the kind of, our lobby space and the cafe and other pieces are kind of on looking at the kind of northern edge of the site. And that was one of the comments came from you all as well as from working with during our kind of design review process is like where are public programs offered. We really looked at kind of lobby and the kind of cafe space on the northwest side, anchored to the northwest open space. And then the arcade space, which we're still working through kind of the programming for that in the phase two, which is a fairly significant kind of food hall. With it's going to be more elegant than what I just described it. But that's anchored around the southeast kind of parklet. So the idea of we're anchoring that those venues around the public space.
Great, thank you. And those are responses to some of that public input that you received, but they're not formally within your public benefit package. Is that correct? Okay, and that's it for me. Thank you.
So thanks again for the presentation, and I just repeat what Adam said, really appreciate how responsive you were to our earlier comments and questions from the earlier briefing. Could you go to, I think it might be slide 24.
Sure.
Relating to the 6th Avenue public benefit. Yeah, so first of all, this is a comment, but I always really appreciate when the design team clearly shows the difference between what code requires and what, that's just super helpful. So this wouldn't be implemented until phase 2, correct? Correct. So my question is, what's the status of the plan for this? Have you started the street improvement permit process? Has SDOT reviewed this? I mean, just where does all that stand right now, given that it's kind of a future phase?
Well, the review process has been started. We've been doing that.
Look, I'll let you towards you.
The process has started. We submitted at 30% conceptual level.
Okay.
That's where it's at currently.
Okay. But you plan to continue to work through that process with a status, I mean, to get through the city?
As the project is,
And maybe this is a question for us, but are they generally happy with what's here so far in terms of what?
We have essentially got less than
great.
for what's been shown so far.
Okay, great. I just think that's important, knowing that it's part of the public benefit package, but it's kind of out a bit. And then my second question is actually back to Beverly and SDOT. So you mentioned that in terms of Thomas Street, SDOT says ready to go. Do you have assuming this goes through as proposed, any estimated timing on when SDOT would be able to implement this?
I think, and I think Aditi's on the line, but we did meet quite recently, and we were looking at the timing of the payment, and assuming we're able to get to city council, get approval at city council, that we were looking at, it's possible for the payment to come in actually by the end of the year. And SDOT, the capital project staff that was in the meeting with Aditi, would be ready to go into construction. I think, would they say like 4 months after that or something?
Yeah. Would this be crew delivered?
Yeah, at this point, I think we had talked about, these guys doing it when they were under construction. The timing doesn't work for that. So it is possible that it could be a contract, but I think at this point it's SDOT crews.
Okay. And then my last question, going back to Adam's question about phasing and site conditions, in your public outreach, the community understands that, I presume, that this is a phased project, and did you hear any concerns expressed by the community about the phasing?
No, I think the one comment was around, I think it was from the Cascade Bicycle Club, which a lot of our bicycle access to, like our locker rooms, the bicycle storage is off the mid-block kind of connector, which was important to activate that. So they wanted to make sure that was open and free and people could move through that.
So that was that.
Correct. And we have bike racks on both sides of the site, so they were also interested in that as well.
That's it for me for questions.
Aditi, I saw you unmute for a moment. Did you have anything that you wanted to add to the conversation about timing?
No, not about timing. I think Beverly covered that. I think it's just the construction mode, and I don't know if this is extremely critical to know, but it's probably going to be a contractor, but we do have a crew option if needed, to Kevin's question.
And Michael, we always thank Beverly, we neglected to thank Aditi, and I apologize for that. She was really the puppet master here. And made this whole thing possible. So thank you, Aditi, very much.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Aditi. I think then we'll go online with Jill, Matt, and Elizabeth.
Thank you. Since I had the benefit of the pre-meeting, I really don't have any questions at this point. Thanks.
Thank you, Jill. Matt?
I also don't have any questions. It's a great presentation. Thank you.
Elizabeth?
I do have questions. You did say that this project is community driven and that that's one of your values and objectives. I'm wondering, I saw that you have had formal meetings with the community over the last 3-4 years. That was part of your presentation. What are you planning going forward, since this is something that it will be phased? This would be new information to the community that there is this new potential funding for public benefit. What are you thinking about in terms of public involvement going forward?
I mean, in general, we'll continue to engage the public. I mean, we've had a great success rate so far, and we want to continue that relationship. We value their input and the dialogue that we've had around the site. So we'll continue that as we go through our processes and update them on changes. You know, obviously that's really kind of the critical piece, is that as things evolve and change, we make sure we outreach and get that communicated outward. So
it's a good idea, though. I think, Elizabeth, maybe we should be talking, Brad, about collaborating with SDOT on the project announcement process, and maybe we circle back with the Uptown Alliance, sort of separately about the public benefit package.
Since I've been on the commission, we tend to ask questions about the demographics of community outreach. Do you have that on what you've already done?
I think we have any demographics. You know, the community is interesting. You know, we did some early outreach. I mean, that particular triangle in the world, you know, doesn't really have. They have residents in some of the apartments. We've been reaching out, talking to the HOAs there. We haven't actually dug into the demographics of the apartment dwellers who live within that radius. A lot of sort of vacant or underused parcels around there. So we've pushed, you know, the boundaries out with the Cascade Bike Club, with the Uptown Alliance, and others, feet first, you know, to take in larger groups. But no, we've not tried to isolate that within your neighborhood.
I remember, Elizabeth, early on at the first public trust meeting, and at the second public trust meeting, there were some presentation about demographics, and one of the things that I mentioned in the pre-briefing was just that. The challenge has been, I think, a neighborhood in transition that is being populated by primarily renters that have been challenging to have any kind of participation with. It doesn't preclude or eliminate the need to continue that loop. I think that part of the challenge I remember from the public trust discussions were some of the potential urban design wins, but not necessarily having a community there that had really formed yet in a way that made that kind of those wins being able to understand them.
Right.
And so I think that's part of the rationale for switching to a different approach for public benefit. That was my recollection of public trust.
Well, I appreciate the attention given to the edges of buildings. So I think this is, well, I'd be interested in how those continue to evolve over time. I also do remember some brainstorming in a previous meeting about other communities. One was skaters, since the skate park is in close proximity. And so I think I'll leave this for deliberations. I'll leave some other thoughts to deliberations. Jack, you said about a fence. This is different. And I wrote that down. And I think, it's different for the potential development. I have a question about how is it different for that's in facing? How is that fence different for out facing for the public during the time that there will be fencing of different ilks?
If we haven't settled on a final design, I think what sort of programmatically, I think what we're trying to articulate that we need to have, the ability to see in and watch that space. But so, we're thinking, plywood barrier is not a good idea, frankly. But there are lots of ways to decorate, other kinds of transparent fencing. I don't know, Jason, you.
Yeah, I mean, Jack's exactly right. So we've talked about it. We've discussed safety issues. We've discussed, in how the construction staging. I think there's a lot of detail in the nuance to how that fence is constructed, even whether the driven piles is temporary, is being moved. We want to maintain it as a safe pedestrian space. So even just the qualities of that fence, I think, start to come into play as we get into the discussion.
And I think we would, welcome a condition that going forward that says that we're going to be working with Michael Windy on, what that design implementation.
It's a perfect topic for a subcommittee after the fact, especially as you work with SDCI to look at the realities of how you're phasing, because that's got to be part of their permit approval for the master use permit. So I think that's an appropriate subcommittee. When you come back, how are you balancing safety and security, which everyone understands, with a streetscape that could benefit? How is it going to benefit the streetscape during the interim?
And as you know, Elizabeth, this whole area provides an opportunity to relate to the community as well, right? The way that you decorate these kind of urban installations can resonate with community activities or members. So we look forward, Michael, to doing that. So.
One last question. I'm interested in how, at the current level of design, you've thought about who feels welcome in those spaces that are designated public. Did that not make sense?
Did we lose?
Yeah, the WebEx is a problem.
Yeah, I think it might be.
Are you? Can you
Shall I repeat what I said?
Yeah, we lost you, I think, for a minute.
Okay, got it. Can you give some examples of how your design of the spaces that are designated as public have been considered so they're definitely encouraging for all to participate?
Sure. I can try to use this slide to kind of enumerate. So one was desire to have kind of these more public activators on the edges of the open space, so that they are kind of provide energy and kind of public eyes on that, and also or make it more inviting. So those were areas like and I'll try to put my cursor on here and I'll rest it. The southeast corner here, which is the arcade space, which is an idea that that is a kind of public space that allows people to come in there. It'll have food, other types of dining, coffee service within that. The other location of that was important, that it was not only fronting the parklet to the south, but it also activates, you can see here with the kind of carved corner, becomes an activator to invite people to move through the pedestrian connector in the mid-block. The other component is it's a fairly sizable venue. We also provided a public access off the 6th Avenue, so that one of the comments we had gotten also was to make sure you're not forgetting about the public. Focus so much on the center of the site that you forget the public edges of the site, meaning the street sides of that. We also have public lobbies that will give people access they can move through, as well as we have different venues that we're looking at placed here, as I'm indicating, on the north side and of the phase 2 building, which is the Easterly building. And then within the phase 1 here, we're also looking at a second kind of coffee cafe kind of retail kind of space on that north side, which is also accessible both from the parklet as well as you can see here from Taylor. So try to position those as kind of key nodes on those. In terms of accessibility, those feature, I don't have that here. I'll go to try to find a quick image. Floor to ceiling glass, so they're easily connected to that. We're also using those kind of spaces to transition. We have some fairly steep grades on the site, so we're using those kind of larger volumes to transition internally for people to move through ramps or stairs through those spaces. So they're accessible, and use those spaces to transition grade if they choose to move through that. Of course, the rest of the site, because we have enough site to work it, is fully accessible as people move around the site. And I'll try to find you an image real quick of kind of architecturally.
While you're doing that, I think the other piece too is each of the external spaces trying to have their own character and substance, so that it doesn't necessarily seem that it's all associated with the building. So even in the right-of-way spaces and those, somebody dropped, trying to create a space that's welcome to all. So people just walking through the neighborhood feel like they're welcome to sit there and hang out. And again, as Ryan said, eroding those two plaza spaces was really key to pull the building back, really trying to create ample space so that people could gather.
And this is looking at that kind of northwest kind of plaza, kind of parkland space. So you can see, as Jason was saying, moving barriers, people feel like they can move through the space. That always gives us our connection kind of to the west off of Taylor or through this space. You can also see the way we pulled seating, which would be publicly accessible here off the north edge, right along the Green Street. We're in Thomas right now as we look at this.
We also use materiality on the ground plane, lighting, other things to kind of draw people in. Those were a lot of discussions with design review.
Yeah, and then I did find this image here. So this is actually looking at, as you're moving kind of under and through the building. So as Jason was talking about, use of textures, seating. That was also a comment that we received from the public as part of our outreach, having places to sit, kind of moments of respite throughout the project, different choices depending on the season. So areas where you're undercover here, like undercover at this edge of the building, or areas where if the sun's out, you grab kind of a sunny spot on the site.
So then is it correct that in addition to moving through these spaces, people can also linger in these spaces?
Yes. Yeah.
In all the ones that are designated public?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
I should clarify, I'm sorry, my WebEx crashed, this is Jack. These are not, everything we're describing is not necessarily part of the public benefit package, right? So the on-site open spaces are probably going to be used to qualify as part of our FAR amenity tier for neighborhood open space, right? So they will be subject to other rules, but that do obviously provide for public accessibility. The fencing issue, likewise, we're happy to come back, but the fencing is, I think, has more to do with the public realm probably than we haven't included in our public.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you. I was taking Beverly seriously to consider the entire project. So thank you for
Oh, no, you should. You
all
should.
that.
Yeah. No,
Thanks. That's all for me.
Adam is going to be taking our action today, and I'll just throw it your way and see how you want to organize commissioner input.
Yeah, well, thank you. Well, so I heard comments around or questions around the phasing and the conditions of the phasing. So I think that's probably one area where we should provide some comments and guidance. I heard some comments around the vegetation, specifically as it relates to the use of the streets and the kind of temporary or long-term conditions of the streets. So I think that's another area we can focus on. Did I miss anything? Anyone? Big themes?
I think a general discussion around the main strategy towards funding the remainder of the Thomas Street right would be the only other thing I would recommend, just a general discussion around the wisdom of that and the timing and the nitty-gritty. Other than that, I think you broad enough.
Okay, so with that, maybe we could start with do the reverse order. Maybe we'll start with folks on screen, maybe Matt, Jill, and Elizabeth, and then we'll go to Kevin in the room here.
Okay, thank you. I've had the opportunity to see this project all the way through, and I really appreciate the development of the amenity package and also just the quality of the presentation throughout. So I actually don't have any comments about the whole holistic approach. I do have just a couple thoughts about the phased concept, and just thinking about during that interim period, assuming the phasing has to happen, but it sounds like that's not certain, but it certainly could. And it also sounds like it's indeterminate how long it might be before phase 2 is constructed. It does seem like that there's some opportunity to use that space. And I'm thinking about, public art, that it certainly could be an exciting opportunity for artists who work in sort of large format. Maybe the space itself could house a temporary art installation that you can see from the sidewalk through the fencing that then maybe in that case, maybe the fencing is even more transparent visually. I'm not sure how that would be accomplished, but it seems like that's an opportunity, especially if we're looking at a year or two of, of that site being undeveloped and, not being able to gain the full benefit of this beautiful through block pedestrian space. So I think that's just the one comment I have is about, going forward is if phasing becomes a reality, how can that space be used to provide energy and public benefit in terms of making that pedestrian experience all around the site a positive one, but for what could be, a reasonably long amount of time. I think other than that, I really do, like I said, appreciate the quality of this work and the presentation. And I'm personally really excited to see this project go forward. Lastly, again, I appreciate the work of the team to support the Thomas Street, Green Street work. I think having that connection realized will not only enhance this project, but enhance the experience of the neighborhood and connectivity to Seattle Center. So thank you.
Okay, I'll go next. I've really, every time we go through this, I learn quite a bit more about all these moving parts. And they're a lot. It's kind of overwhelming in some respects. I think my overall impression about the process, I think everyone else has lots of comments on design, so I think I'll focus on the process. is, that what we're talking about is areas of discomfort that both the city and the developer have to explore in order to make this partnership around Thomas Street work. In terms of the payment at a different time, in terms of potential phasing. And I just think that, I think it's really important that we take yes for an answer here. As a commission, we wanted them to explore offsite. When we reviewed Thomas, we wanted them to explore private money. And here we are getting it all kind of wrapped up in a bow, but there's a lot that has some discomfort around it. And so I think it's just really interesting that both sides have to explore and trust through all of that in order to actually get what it was that we hoped would come together as we reviewed both these projects. So that's really, my big takeaway is how interesting and challenging this all is and how much I think it's the right thing to do. So thanks.
I appreciate those areas of discomfort. I also very much appreciate your continuing to think creatively and strategically through this process so far, and to kind of reverse some of the questions and look at them differently. I'm hoping that there will continue to be the will and the energy and the stewardship of the process going forward, since it's going to be a long one, to make sure that's still happening. I do think this part of Seattle has been in transition for centuries, and I think it's part of the strength of this area. So I'm hoping that since this process is going to go on for a while, to actually have structures in place, there'll be temporary conditions, et cetera. I'm hoping that the transitional nature of this neighborhood it can also be reflected, and those two things can relate to each other in meaningful ways to definitely have some of this be community driven, because the community is going to be changing during this time. And I realize who does this is not something that we're going to, we're going to decide for anybody here today, but I think it can be an even more thrilling project if that kind of thinking along the way and broadening and paying attention to new communities that are going to be passing through and lingering and appreciating these public spaces can actually have some ongoing care throughout. And once again, I want to say that, when Jack said this is different, I agree, and I think that there's an opportunity for something that is different, that's necessary but also different. So thank you.
Right, Kevin.
Thanks, Adam. So in my time at the city, I worked extensively on South Lake Union planning, uptown planning, Climate Pledge Arena with Jill and many others, and the Bicycle Master Plan, a project I managed way back in the day, was adopted 10 years ago, hard to believe. Thomas Street is a linchpin in all of that work and a main connection in all of that work. So I'm trying to sound less thrilled than I am, but this is like a really, really big deal. It's a really big deal. And truthfully, my only concern about it is making sure it gets done, which is why I asked the question that I did. But many thanks to the developer, the design team, Aditi. I know firsthand how long she's been working on this too. I mean, this goes back years. I mean, this is years of city planning that's gone into this, and I think the fact that it can and hopefully will happen is great. And then going back to Beverly's warning to not just get blinded by that, I do really appreciate that the public benefit really focused on the outside edges, plazas, the streetscape improvements on 6th. Tree canopy is a huge issue for the city. The city's been, really spending a lot of churn on tree canopy, so I think that's an important part of this. So again, my only sort of concern about that does relate to the phasing, when and how 6 is going to happen. I do trust that SDOT staff and Council Central staff will, kind of try to hone in on that when this goes to council. It is in the developer's interest to make sure that phase 2 is staged in a good way. I do think it's still appropriate to add conditions perhaps about the phasing if that's appropriate, but I think I'm confident that can be dealt with in a good way, but I think that is an important element of this, given how the project is happening. So, thank you.
Okay, so similarly to Kevin and Jill, regarding the funding strategy, I just want to express a great appreciation for the tight working relationship between the DT, Beverly Design Commission, SDCI, and this team, and really appreciate the ways that you all express the development of that offsite thinking and the way that you all and collaborators at the city continue to seek opportunities for that mutual benefit between projects. So between the goals for offsite contribution from this project and the goals for private benefit for Thomas Street, it is really great to see those things come together. And so just want to really express appreciation for that. I also want to, this has been consistent throughout your process, but the clarity of how you all have described public benefit when you come to us really helps us to comment in ways that are useful. So just want to express appreciation for that, and for your descriptions of how the Design Commission has helped shape that approach throughout each of our conversations with you. I also appreciate the publicly accessible spaces, businesses, etc., that are open to the community. And while I know that those are outside of the public benefit package itself, I do think that it's very important to the character of the public benefits package. So I really do think that those are integral to the public feel of those corner spaces, that although the spaces themselves aren't in the public benefit package, I do think that they're integral to the success of that public benefit. I also appreciate the commitment to the public benefits that are split between phases, and similar to others, I think that continuing to work with SDCI on that space between the buildings, as well as any ways that we can support you all, if that is through subcommittee on that interim condition between phases. I think that as a commissioner, I'm interested in us being able to help you in that process. I think some of the ideas that have come forward about visibility, safety, and security, whether art is a piece of that strategy, if we can help you through that process as you continue to move forward with STCI, I'd be interested in us doing that. And that's it for me.
Thanks. Well, again, thank you for the presentation. I think this was a really interesting project. This is the first time that I had eyes on the project, so I'll iterate again that it was helpful to kind of hear what previously guidance had been given to you and kind of how that got iterated into the project to kind of give me some context. Kind of building off of something that Matt said is for the phasing of this project, especially if you are going to consider art as part of that phase 2 in that interim condition. Perhaps there's an opportunity there in which, if we have this transparency, to have an art piece be developed on that site that could then be transferred into a permanent installation at the end of the project, and maybe that makes that kind of interim phase 2 area more exciting to the public and not just an empty lot while we're in that waiting period. So maybe that's just something to consider, but definitely appreciate the safety and consideration around how complicated phasing sites can be. And then the other thing I'll say is, it's just really exciting to see a project that's considering how a site gets integrated with public space and with the streetscape, and that, you're really not looking at this as these are two completely separate entities, to see that that there's consideration for natural public flow. I certainly have seen some developments where there is public access, but it's like up a stairwell and it's confusing, and it's great to see that that's open, easy to understand for the public, by the public. And it was great to hear, and I appreciate the outreach to the communities that are going to be actively using not only on your site, but near your site, To even hear from you directly that you had feedback and integrated the feedback from Cascade Cycle Club and other communities, I think was really helpful to hear. So, yeah, great presentation.
Awesome. Well, I'll try to sum this up. Are there any other comments from agencies, city staff? And then are there any clarifying questions from the presenters or the owners?
I was just going to suggest to Edie when we get all finished that you probably should write a book about this.
Or
No,
a short movie.
Because, I mean, discomfort is a good word to use. I mean, there were times, it's been a roller coaster a little bit on this public benefit thing for the last 6-8 months, trying to wrap our arms around it, figure out what, but we ended up in a happy place, so.
Awesome. Well, we'd like to thank the project team for their presentation for the public benefit package of the T6 project. Whoops, now my screen has gone blank.
Don't draw any inferences.
Yeah, it's an open. So overall, I heard a lot of appreciation from the commission. Specifically, I think Jill advised us to take yes for an answer. Well said. But specifically around, I think, both the responsiveness to the commission, the kind of hard work coordinating with all of the various city entities involved, the improvement and addition to the urban tree canopy, really pushing the public benefits to the edges and scattering them between the phases so that there's active edges in the interim condition. I think maintaining access around 6th and John in the interim condition, as well as adding in striping of 6th Street in the interim condition. I heard the early wins of the Thomas Street, Green Street, and implementing those in the short term and providing funding at risk. I think what else did we have about what we appreciated? Many things. So we really appreciate, I think we've seen a lot of positive changes in the project that we've mentioned. So with that, I think the Seattle Design Commission moves to approve the public benefit package for the T6 project. And I believe I heard we'd like to add the condition that we'd like to see you come back for a subcommittee around the interim uses and ideas for the phasing, specifically around the, is that the eastern site, the phase 2, ideas for fencing or other program to enhance that. And I think with that, did I get it all? Are we ready for an action?
I think so.
Do we have Michael, do we have the 4 conditions you had in there?
Do you want to be, well, I want to make sure that the commissioners, thank you, Jill. There were 4 proposed conditions. If you want to read those to make sure that the commission and everyone here in the room are comfortable with the language. We did have an opportunity. Those were drafted yesterday, sent to the development team to make sure that they understood what it was that the commission was trying to accomplish and that there weren't any significant problems. And I think what you heard and what you'll see in these 4, I think really are kind of some of the issues that you're all trying to deal with, in particular, how you manage access during the phasing. So.
Yeah, I guess that was my question. I heard proposals on some of these. So one was restriping of parking along 6th Avenue during interim period. And I thought I heard the team say that they plan to do that.
Yeah.
Great. Fencing treatments that enhance the public ground around phase 2 interim period. So I heard that that's what we're proposing as a condition for the subcommittee. Increasing tree planting on 6th Avenue consistent with additional tree canopy on Taylor Avenue North. So that's a condition that we didn't address.
I had one comment about that when we saw that, and that is, that sounds fun. It's just, we have more limited dimension basin on the Fix than we do. And so the canopy layout you see on Taylor is possible just because we have so much more dimension, right?
Yeah, I mean, Yeah, I can't create more space. We're trying to max it out
Right,
as
And
much as we
utilities
can.
are pretty dense.
Understood that you have to balance your obligations, but also, but the goal being to try to provide as robust
Exactly.
canopy as you're providing over on Taylor.
Great. And then the fourth one, which I think is related to the second one, is working with SDCI to refine interim conditions of the open space area between phase 1 and 2 building.
And you've spoken to that, and I think that's helpful,
Yep.
but as you know, devil's always in the details with,
Yeah.
but maintaining, because in your presentation, it was very clear, there's a really nice, it's not part of your public benefit package, but line of sight between the two rights of way, not trying to interrupt that to the extent that you can.
Okay. All right. So with those conditions, I think we can move to a vote. Should we start with those on screen?
Yeah, sure.
Go ahead, Matt, maybe Matt, Jill, Elizabeth, and then back around the horn here.
Oh, sorry, is there, I vote to approve. I didn't know if that was a preamble that you had to make, but.
No.
Got it. Thank you.
I vote to approve as well. Thank you.
I also vote to approve with the condition of a subcommittee.
Thank you.
Also vote to approve with conditions.
Vote to approve with conditions.
And vote to approve with conditions.
I also vote to approve with the conditions. And so the commission has passed the public benefit package unanimously. Thank you for your
Thank
time.
you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, it would be a fun exercise in some of these, I think, to actually go back and compare the little snippet of public benefit that we start at the first meeting with you guys to what it ends up being, because these two, I mean, the project looks similar, but the public benefit package is quite different, right?
Well, but I think that really
Yeah.
speaks to what the commission told
Right.
you, which is
Right,
this needs to be more external than internal.
right,
And that you committed to that with levels of discomfort.
yes, indeed.
Jill, that's gonna be on your t-shirt or your pocket.
Right.
But that gesture matters, and you did it, and I think that's where so much of the commission's support for your project rests, so thank you.
So are some of the commissioners leaving?
Yes, Matt, this is Matt and Elizabeth and Pooja's last meeting.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you.
Last action.
Thank you all for your service. It also means apparently there are going to be some vacancies.
Oh, we have 3 more
So-
lined up, ready to go. You'll know some I was.
When you retire, they get you.
Yes, yes. I put everybody on speed dial when I hear they're retired. Jill. Yeah.
Right. Right.
Kevin.
Right.
Thanks again.
Okay.
Much
Thank you.
appreciated.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And commissioners, I'm gonna stop the recording because I think we're done today. Jill, did you have anything you want to close?
No, I just think this has been a very good process, and I'm gonna miss Matt and Elizabeth and Pooja.
Yeah.
I've really enjoyed our time together.
Mutual.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Yeah, me too. Thank you, everyone.
All right, with that, we are closed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.